Hi, welcome to another endorsement interview with the Times Editorial Board. With us today is Bill Fine, the Republican candidate for state representative in the 12th District. We should introduce the others in the room. I'm Doug Ross, editorial page editor. Krista Zavanovic, our assistant managing editor, is here as well. And so is Brian Vernellis on the other side of the lens. Let's begin by getting a little bit of a handle on what your background is and what's prepared you for this race.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me today. I've grown up in the Calumet region. Started out in Hammond, moved to Munster in 1958. Graduated the Munster public school system. I went to public school in Hammond as well. After that, I went to undergraduate training in Bloomington, got an undergraduate degree there, and then went on to law school in Bloomington. Came back to the region, practiced law in Hammond until 1988, and then went out to a solo practice in Highland, Indiana. While I was practicing law in Hammond, I also went back to school at Purdue Calumet and got a master's degree in English literature as well. So I've done a lot of things. I taught English at Purdue Cal for a couple of semesters, but primarily I've been practicing law, getting involved in some professional organizations and some community charitable organizations and some religious organizations. They say that if you really want to know a community, you should either become a minister, a bartender, or a lawyer. And I've dealt with rich and poor, labor and management, all races, all religions, and I think I have a pretty good idea of who lives in the region, what's important to them, what's hurting them, what they need, and that's the package I bring to this position. I think I have 40-some years of experience. I've never held a political office before, although I served on the Lake County Election Board for almost a year. But I think I bring a fresh perspective from the private sector, and I think I have the preparation to deal with some really important issues that are affecting the region. I grew up here at a time when you could get out of high school and get a job in the construction trades or go into the mills or go to college. Those options are severely limited for people now. So I think there are some things that a new type of leader can bring to the table, and I think I represent that type of leader.
Okay, well, the first question on everybody's mind is going to be, what can you do about job creation?
Jobs is the one thing. I've been knocking on doors since the summer, and jobs is the one consistent thing I hear from people. Jobs is the core of what's not happening well with the region right now. And if you fix the job situation, you fix poverty. And once you fix poverty, you fix the problems with education, you fix crime, you fix the social fabric of the area, and everything else starts to turn around. As it is right now, a population that grew because of industry and manufacturing and steel is having a hard time supporting itself on a retraction in steel industry, a much lower manufacturing base, and you can't support this kind of population strictly on retail and service types of businesses. So it's very important that we reinstate the type of businesses that pay the kinds of salaries, the good union jobs, the good professional jobs that built this area. In the 100 years or so that this area went from being a marshland and onion fields to reaching a pinnacle in maybe the 50s and 60s and 70s and starting to degrade from that point on, I'm one of those people who think we can still come back to that. So in answer to your question, what can be done, we need to have more of a job-focused agenda in the State House. I have the endorsement of the Indiana Chamber of Commerce. My opponent does not, has a terrible rating for jobs. I think there should be more strong union jobs, but those strong union jobs come from strong businesses that are making money and are able to support those types of payrolls. So there are some things that can be done. I just think of two right offhand. One would be that we create an agency that helps bring jobs to Lake County. The state's not working hard to bring jobs to Lake County. They present opportunities to people outside the state of Indiana, and they routinely pick Porter County, LaPorte County, Tippecanoe County, and other places in the state. We need to get over the image that this isn't a business-friendly environment and start to bring those jobs here. So I would suggest an agency made up of union representation, political people, business people, kind of a Lake County tourist bureau to bring businesses to this area. Now, we do have a few private agencies that do that type of thing, but they they have good intentions, but they don't have the wherewithal or the funding to be able to really pull that off. So I think it would be important to have a state agency that resurrects what can be done here in Lake County. An easier thing to do would be they recently passed a law that allowed business personal property taxes to be abated within a county. A lot of counties don't want to do that because they think they're giving away too many tax dollars for people who would come here otherwise. I think that law should be tweaked so that you can establish districts where it can be implemented rather than being county-wide. And that way, the empty factories in East Chicago and Hammond and Gary can be within a district that would allow that kind of personal property abatement for business inventory, business investment, and not have it affect towns like Munster and Highland and Griffith, et cetera, where people are already happy to come and make an investment. So there are tangible things that could be done. I'd like to make the point that when Boeing was considering relocating, almost every legislature in the state, in the United States, was trying to find a way to bring Boeing to their community. We have the airport. We would have been a great source for Boeing to come out. My opponent is quoted in the Times as saying the state has done everything it could do, pretty much everything it can do, to bring new business to the state. She's run out of ideas. We need people who are optimistic, who have new ideas, who can make this happen rather than simply maintain the status quo and let things continue to decline.
Okay. The connection between education and jobs is, obvious. What would you do to try to make sure that students graduate more career or college ready?
Well, if there are business opportunities for them to go to, that would be a big incentive in and of itself. The biggest problem with education right now is the funding formula, which rewards non-performing schools and penalizes high-performing schools. So a school like Munster gets less than the average per pupil contribution across the state of Indiana. Munster gets about half per student that a city like Gary gets. So we're sending more money to Gary than we're sending to Munster. Now I understand and accept the rationale for sending more money to Gary. Those students require a different type of education than a school in Munster does. Many of those students, the best meals they have of the day are served at the school. They have special concerns that don't apply in a town like Highland or Griffith or Munster, or even in Hammond, for example, although Hammond has a lot of similar problems that Gary has. I'm not saying we take money necessarily away from those urban types of schools, but we have to at least level the playing field and let a town like Munster get its fair share. And I think the legislature is intending to make some change in that, but I want to go to the legislature and be able to make changes and things like that. If I'm elected as a member of the Republican caucus, and it's very likely there will be at least a majority, if not a supermajority of Republicans, I get to sit in the caucus room and make arguments that my opponent cannot make. I can vote for a budget that she will feel obligated to vote against because of other things in the budget she doesn't like. So I would be in a position to really make significant changes to fix this funding mechanism that's simply out of whack and penalizes a high-performing school. The residents of Munster, if they want to pay more, I live in Munster, if we want to pay more to maintain a great school, I think we have a right to do that, and it's a worthy cause. But the state needs to man up, so to speak, and pay its fair share.
Okay. Well, as long as we're on the subject of education and the budget, the CC has been called a shadow education department, and it was created outside the budget. And now that you'll be going into a new budget year, what are your thoughts of trying to handle that impasse between the board and the Department of Education? And
well, I follow that very, very carefully because my daughter, Sarah, is one of the members of the State Board of Education. So I get a lot of inside baseball as to what's going on with that. I'll remind your viewers that the idea of the CECI was something that Governor Pence talked about during the campaign, not knowing whether or not Tony Bennett was going to be reelected or thrown out. So contrary to the argument that it was created simply as a shadow agency to defang Glenda Ritz, it was something that was in the works all along. And I like the idea of combining a central agency that oversees the work aspect of education and the pure educational aspect of education. The CECI is over the Indiana Career Council, the Indiana Education Roundtable, the Indiana Network of Knowledge, the Indiana Works Council, and the Indiana Department of Education. And some coordination of what they're doing is a worthwhile thing to do and is entirely consistent with what Governor Pence was saying, which is we can't simply educate our children to go to college. We also have to educate them so that they can make a living. Every job in the state of Indiana is not going to require a college degree. So to coordinate this effort so that our high schools are teaching people real life skills and allowing them to get into our colleges, so that our colleges right now are facing great remediation problems because the children are not getting out of college in great numbers ready to initially begin their freshman course study. I think the idea of the CECI makes a lot of sense. My one objection to the CECI, and where it is slightly becoming a shadow agency, is that the State Board of Education is relying very much on the CECI rather than strictly the State Board of Education. And I would say that that was made necessary by Ms. Ritz's position that she has an agenda to enforce, and the State Board of Education has a different agenda that they want to enforce, and there's been some conflict there between two entirely legitimate points of view. The idea of education reform in Indiana is not a Republican versus Democrat issue. It's an issue between reformists and non-reformists. The battle lines have become partisan because the ISTA is resistant to reform and the Democratic Party is closely allied with the ISTA. And since Ms. Ritz was elected, they've made that an issue, in my way of thinking, a wedge issue, to try to have some mileage in this upcoming election. I think fundamentally everybody is concerned about the children. I think some people, for very cynical reasons, are turning it into a political issue. I think the mechanisms are all there to help our kids, and I think people need to withdraw from the partisan politics and start paying attention to what our children need.
Okay, we should talk about infrastructure, of course. INDOT is saying that there won't be enough money. You know, Major Moves is gone, that money from the lease of the toll road. There's not enough money to maintain the roads they've got, so they're getting into even worse shape than they already are. What do you do?
One of the ways we fix jobs in this area is to begin putting money into our infrastructure. And whether it's the Klein Avenue Bridge or working on other types of municipal projects, there are a lot of county roads that need a lot of help. Some money at some point needs to start going back into that. Now, in a perfect world, if this jobs program I'm advocating and if the recovery continues to develop, there will be sufficient tax revenues to start paying for those kinds of things. Unfortunately, this has been a very, very quiet recovery. And as a result, you have another battle that's going on in the legislature, which is insufficient tax revenue is coming in, and the legislature and the governor is intent on maintaining this reserve fund, which the Democrats call a surplus, which is actually called, and I looked it up, the Countercyclical Revenue and Economic Stabilization Fund. It's a fund that's been around since 1998. It's been at $2 billion before. It's been paid down to nothing. It's intended to do two things. One is to deal with the cash flow, because tax dollars don't all come in at the same time, and the government needs a certain amount of money in the till to pay its bills. But it's also intended to deal with bad economic times, so that we don't pay down our money and not have any kind of a reserves. The big $2 billion amount helps make Indiana a good target for developing business. And we have to struggle with two demands. One is, do we make Indiana less attractive for bonding and for developing business and pay that money down to deal with our roads and a number of other things that we're not putting enough money into? Or do we maintain that amount? I think a balance has to be found. If the revenues are still going to be low, we may need to dig into that $2 billion to some reasonable amount. The national standard is you should have a minimum of a 5% reserve. $2 billion is more than a 5% reserve. So I think there's a little bit of leeway there. But for I see fixing our roads as an investment for the future. So that's the kind of thing that I would vote in favor of, just to start getting things going in terms of jobs and fixing our crumbling infrastructure.
I have a question related to that, and that is, how do you come up with that money in the interim while we're waiting for the economy to get better and we're waiting for more jobs to come in? Connected with that is, Readers call me all the time and talk to me too, and both Republicans and Democrats have said to me, I think we have to stop with the decreasing of taxes for business. We're at a good place. Our bond situation is great because of our surplus, or for lack of a better word. So where does the money come from to fix our infrastructure, which is critical? And secondly, where do you stand on continuing to decrease taxes for business?
I haven't seen the actual numbers of what their proposal is. I don't know how much goodwill there is in the legislature to continue to knock taxes down. We have knocked a number of our taxes down. Our income taxes, are, especially in Lake County, are on the high side, but a lot of business taxes have been reduced. I expect that there will be some effort to continue to reduce them. I would weigh a willingness to continue to raise taxes with an understanding as to whether they're prepared to start taking some money out of this reserve fund to balance things out. What they've been doing in the past is they budget money across the board, and then they look to see what kind of money's coming in, and if it hasn't met expectations, which it hasn't for the last couple of years, they go to the agencies and say, you will need to kick back a certain amount of money out of what was budgeted to you. Sometimes they had the money and the money comes back. Sometimes it's money that they counted on that they're no longer going to be getting.
And for some agencies, that doesn't make any sense, especially like for DCS and other agencies.
Right.
No,
but it's a good point. There are some agencies where it's been terrible. So there needs to be more of a selective process. And they've started doing a process where I know some women's health agencies complained that they were losing money recently, and it turned out it was just a misunderstanding because the governor's office asked them to give them an explanation as to how the money was going to be spent. And I think that signals an intention to start looking at what those changes are going to be. They call them reversions when you get the money back. Rather than an across-the-board reversion, I think that what they'll start to do is cherry pick through the entire budget and decide, obviously they're all worthwhile things, but to the extent that they can get people to live with less money, to the extent that they can say that this is a program that can be deferred shortly, let's pull the money from there and put it someplace else, I think that's how they can raise some money. So it would be a combination of that and going into the reserves.
Okay, we should talk about the South Shore expansion and, what you see for the state's share in this, and whether you agree with it.
My district loves the South Shore expansion, and it's a great deal for the district simply because it's win-win for them. At a relatively modest expenditure, they get the benefit of a station close by. In Munster in particular, it's going to be a major boon to the economy. I know a lot of other people in the county are not very happy with it, which is I think a combination of some of the things I'm concerned about. I'm concerned that the price continues to grow. I'm concerned that there are a number of people in the county who are not prepared to contribute to the thing. I think the state, through the RDA, could contribute more money to the project. I'm concerned that parties in the northern part of the county that are saying we're happy to get money for our development from the RDA and we're happy to get more money from the income tax from the south part of the county are saying, well, what's in it for us if we're not, this is actually going to hurt our area. I take, inconsistent with my idea of changing the viewpoint of the area, I have a longer view. There was a study made, I think 2 summers ago. My opponent presented a bill to try to get Lake County to control NICTI, I think is what they refer to it as, which is the commuter transportation district that controls the South Shore. And it was an attempt basically for the Lake County, by way of Democratic mayors, to control that whole district. So clearly, at least 2 years ago, everyone knew this was going to be happening. That bill failed, but it went into a study committee that found that only half of the ridership in Gary, East Chicago, and Hammond actually came from those cities. That means half of the ridership is coming from areas which will be directly served presently by moving the railroad south. Those people would be served by this. There would be construction money that would help the area that would be served by this. But more importantly, it will draw people to our area who have high-paying jobs in Chicago who will now be able to easily commute. For me to drive to Hammond to commute to Chicago by way of the South Shore doesn't make much sense. But if I live in Munster and I want to take a train downtown and I have an executive level salary, that's a good way to bring people into this area. So you're going to draw population, high-paying jobs to the population, which benefits everybody, but more importantly, our grandchildren and future generations. Instead of leaving the area because they can't find good job opportunities here, will have the ability to live in Lake County, to live in the southern part of Lake County, certainly to live in the ridge communities, be able to work at a job in Chicago, and have a future here in this area. So I see it long range as being crucial. I'm not sure that we'll double ridership in the first year, and like I said, I'm concerned that it's costing more than it should cost. I think it's been inflated so that every pig can get to the trough. But if the cost was controlled and there's a way to fund it, I think it's going to be a tremendous project for the area.
I'm glad you mentioned the RDA, because we should talk about the Regional Development Authority is up for reauthorization.
Yes.
and renewed funding. It's currently getting $10 million a year from the state. How do you persuade your colleagues?
I think the RDA originated with the idea that if we're going to send money to Lake County, let's put it in some method where it's broadly distributed instead of controlled by one select group. My disappointment with the RDA, and I know the Marquette plan's been on the board for a long time, and I know that it has a lot of support, but I'm not sure that fixing parks in the northern part of the county necessarily leads to economic growth for the entire county. I think there needs to be some tweaking in terms of making if you read the original legislation to establish the RDA, it talks about economic development, but that's been pretty broadly defined as to what's economic development. The railroad is an economic development. And I certainly think it should be reauthorized. It should be refunded, at least at the same level. I would argue for more money because we're talking about a significant project that needs some state assistance. I think the state of Indiana benefits from this project, even though we can't convince everybody in Lake County. But I'm hoping that they have a broader viewpoint of it, and if I'm sitting in the caucus room, I can make that argument to them. So it's certainly something I would promote in reestablishing it, but I'd like to tighten it up in terms of how they're spending the money.
Okay, fair enough. And we should talk about the casino industry as well. It's been shrinking over the past number of years. What would you do?
Well, I think the commission is coming, the study committee is coming out with a recommend. I don't know if it's come out yet, but the word on the street is it's going to recommend land-based casinos. And I think that that is a worthwhile thing to do. We've already opened Pandora's box in terms of gambling up here. If that's going to attract more people, I think that what's the cost to the county to do it? I don't think we're going to double our number of gamblers from the community. Most of those people are coming from out of state anyway. Let's make it more convenient for them to come and spend money at our gambling institutions.
Okay, and is there anything we didn't ask that we should have asked?
Yeah, I'd like to bring up one other idea I have. That's something I talked about a couple of years ago. We have a problem that I may be the only person who's talking about. It doesn't seem to have got much momentum, and that is that the way temporary poor relief is handled in the urban townships, I think is a real problem that needs to be addressed by the legislature. Calumet and North Township, which encompass the 12th district, have this situation. People who need financial assistance from the government can go to the welfare department, which it's not called welfare department, but it's basically the county-based system that's funded by the state to get assistance. If you want to talk about shadow agencies, there is a township fund available, and actually the primary responsibility of townships is to provide financial relief. That was originally intended to be temporary financial relief, emergency financial relief, and what's happened primarily because our urban townships now have so much poverty and this recovery is taking so long, you have a situation where people are serial applicants for relief. Every 30 days, they're obligated. They have the right to and do appear before their township trustee and ask for assistance. Right. There's no coordination of benefits really between the state-funded, administered through the welfare, and the township. And the fact that they're coming in on an every 30-day basis, which, again, God love them, they deserve to get any relief that's available to them. But it requires a substantial administrative process. So one of the problems you had with Calumet Township was not only were they taxing the taxpayers to pay for this extraordinary amount of relief, which shadowed what was going on from the state, you also had a tremendous administration system, which perhaps was too big, but certainly had to be big because there was a tremendous demand there. So I'm looking into whether or not it would be legal to do this in terms of special legislation, but I think it would be reasonable to suggest that in urban townships, defined as townships that have a city, a first-class city or a second-class city, something along those lines, that the poor relief should be taken away from them and transferred over to the county, let the county coordinate those benefits, let the county administer those benefits, and let the state pay for those benefits. It is not fair for the residents of North and Calumet Township to have to pay a substantial tax burden because they have the misfortune of having some large urban pockets of poverty. And I think that's something that would, at least up here, should get broad support. And I think it's something that we should be able to sell to the state. And again, if I'm in the caucus room, I get to make that argument.
Okay. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. With Bill Fine, the Republican candidate for state representative in the 12th District, I'm Doug Ross, Krista Zavanovac, Brian Vernellis. Thank you for viewing.
Thank you very much. Good to see you, Doug.
Thank you.